I wasn't a very outgoing kid at the time. If I ever did anything social, it was because my degenerate friends had somehow dragged me out of the house. This was one of those times. Well, it was supposed to be. My friend Philip invited me to a house party at like 8 p.m. It was pretty spontaneous, but I had nothing going on, so I reluctantly agreed to go with him. I knew he was going to give me crap if I refused. I can't even lie though. The idea of a party, even with strangers, sounded more appealing than being alone. Philip was a few towns over from me, so it made more sense for us to drive separately instead of going together. He gave me the address, and I was on my way. The literal second I pulled onto the street, Philip bailed at the last minute. Rightfully so, I was super frustrated. How could he bail on me like this? There I was, feeling like a complete idiot outside a stranger's house. Annoyed, but determined not to waste the night, I decided to go in. I had driven all the way here, I thought. Might as well go inside. I walked up the front steps and knocked on the door. The host, Randy, greeted me warmly. He was instantly likable, charismatic, and friendly without being a douchebag. He introduced me around, and things were actually less awkward than I had anticipated. People were really friendly to me, despite not knowing who I was. There were even a few girls I had my eyes on. I decided to enjoy the party and hit the booze hard. It was getting pretty late, but the party was still raging. Admittedly, I might have overdone it with the drinking. At one point, I was so nauseous and dizzy that I needed a break. It must have been close to 2 a.m. at that point. I went upstairs to look for a bathroom, but they were all occupied. The house was deceptively big. Granted, it was probably the alcohol, but I was literally getting lost, stumbling through the maze of hallways up there. After making it to the top floor, I found a door leading to what seemed like an attic or storage room. Desperate for privacy, I figured it was as good a place as any to pull myself together. I groped around blindly for the light switch, but there was none. This was definitely an attic or something, as there was also dust everywhere. There was a window in the far corner, which I opened, allowing the cool night breeze to wash over me. There was a solid minute there where I was seriously considering throwing up onto the roof. The breeze somewhat cured my nausea though, so I just kept my head hung out of the window. It was dark outside, and the quiet was a refreshing contrast to the boisterous chaos downstairs. Sometimes, all you need to restore your state of mind is a gentle breeze and some peace and quiet. Just as I was about to close the window and head back, I heard a faint noise. Footsteps on the roof shingles. That didn't make any sense, though. Was I going crazy? Curious, I climbed out onto the roof. In all honesty, there was probably a 0% chance I would have done that if I had been sober. I slowly stood up and looked around. In the moonlight, I saw something terrifying. There were 2 masked figures with bags emerging from another window. It dawned on me. Randy's house was being robbed. I started panicking. Should I shout, confront them? Then a more pressing question hit me. What if they were armed? In my clumsy state of disbelief, I slipped and scuffed one of the shingles pretty loudly. One of the burglars heard it and jolted his head in my direction. Our eyes briefly met, and I froze. He nudged his partner, and the 2 of them quickly started making their way across the roof. Adrenaline surged through me. I couldn't let them get away. Randy had been so welcoming, and I felt a surge of loyalty. I decided to act. I quietly followed the burglars across the roof, keeping a safe distance. They headed towards the sloping part of the roof for an easier escape. As they climbed down, I pulled out my phone to dial 911, but fumbled in my drunken state, dropping it. The phone clattered loudly, and the burglar turned sharply. "Who's there?" one of them hissed. Heart pounding, I ducked and scanned my surroundings, spotting a loose roof shingle. Without thinking, I grabbed it and hurled it toward them. It missed, but the noise startled them, causing one to lose his footing. He tumbled down the roof, crashing into the gutter before falling to the ground. The other burglar, now panicked, leaped to a neighboring tree and scrambled down. I rushed to the edge of the roof and saw the fallen burglar groaning on the ground. I needed to alert everyone. As I turned to head back, I heard sirens. Someone else must have called the cops. I stumbled back into the attic room and made my way downstairs, trying to appear calm. The party was still in full swing, oblivious to the drama outside. I found Randy laughing and chatting with guests. "Randy, you need to call the police. There's been a robbery. I saw the burglars on the roof," I said. Randy's face turned from amusement to shock. "Are you serious?" he said, as he hurried to make the call. I explained what happened. The party mood shifted from celebration to concern. Apparently, one of Randy's neighbors had coincidentally already called the police to file a noise complaint, which was an incredibly ironic turn of good fortune. When they arrived, I recounted my story, leading them to the injured burglar. The man was arrested, but his partner had fled. The party ended abruptly, people started scattering, and the lights got flipped on. I tried my best to act sober, but even after all that happened, I was still stumbling a bit. Randy thanked me profusely, still in disbelief. As for me, I was just glad I could help, despite the bizarre and terrifying circumstances. Looking back, I still can't really explain why the burglars would have chosen a house having a party to rob. But maybe they had prior knowledge of the house and knew no one would be upstairs. I figured that would be the end of the story. But fast forward a few months, and I've got quite the update. I was playing video games at Philip's house one night when he got a call from Randy, who invited us over for a few beers. Up until that point, I hadn't actually realized the two of them were that close. The first thing I noticed when I pulled up to Randy's house was that the front door and every window in sight were completely different. Was I not remembering his house right? I could have sworn the windows and the front door had been white, but they were all gray and much more heavy-duty looking. Randy waved us in, and we went down to his basement. We cracked a few beers and started playing a game of pool. To my surprise, he actually recognized me from the party and thanked me again for my trouble. What he told us was actually crazy, though. Apparently, the burglar the police caught that night refused to snitch on his partner and was currently serving a lengthy prison sentence. The police hadn't been able to get any leads into catching the other guy, though. Randy told us that not even a week after the incident happened, his family started receiving threatening letters from an unknown sender, some of which included pictures of Randy and his family members. Obviously, they reported these occurrences, but the police had no real leads. A month after that, Randy's mom noticed a suspicious vehicle circling the house at like 1 a.m. And a few days later, Randy's dad claimed the things in their backyard had been gone through and moved around. In response, Randy's dad upgraded their home security and even went as far as to replace and reinforce all their doors and windows. I was shocked. this was still an ongoing issue for Randy, and I had no idea how serious a situation like this could get. Summer's fast approaching, and I'm sure I'll have another update when I see Randy again. Summer is the greatest season by a long shot. That's a hill I'll die on any day. My love for the summer doesn't revolve around partying or drinking, as you may expect, but nature. Warmer weather and the outdoors are inseparable, in my opinion. And I guarantee you that when the heat rolls through, I spend more hours outside than inside. It was a warm night in mid-June, a few summers ago when this happened. I was 17 or 18 at the time. For context, there's a massive nature preserve near my house. When I say massive, I mean it. It's close to 1,000 acres in size. To this day, there are still parts of it that I'm positive I haven't explored. 2 of my friends and I agreed to spend a night camping in those woods. Technically, camping there was strictly forbidden and borderline illegal, but we figured that there was no chance someone would catch us in this dense forest. We just had to trek as deeply as possible. Chuck was the camping fanatic of the group. I'm telling you, this kid loved cosplaying as a Boy Scout and probably knew close to 100 different knots. Our other friend, Jackson, always supplied the drinks. If we were sober, he was unhappy. That's just how things went when Jackson was involved. I remember the feeling of the gentle summer breeze blowing through my hair as the 3 of us packed up Jackson's car. The weather was ideal. Not too cold, not too hot. A few beers later, the 3 of us found ourselves lugging camping equipment through the woods at like 11:30. I can't lie, I was feeling the alcohol start to hit me as we marched along. Chuck always carried this industrial-grade flashlight with him, so the darkness of the forest wasn't much of an issue. As much as I enjoyed the outdoors, though, traversing through thick woods at this hour was a bit creepy, even with Chuck's flashlight on hand. After close to half an hour of straight walking, the 3 of us found ourselves in a small, flat clearing that was an ideal spot to set up camp. We pitched our tent as per Chuck's instruction and set our chairs up. The fire was the next step. Chuck once again took the lead on this, and after a few more minutes, we had a pretty decent fire going. Jackson reached into his bag and tossed me another drink. He then grabbed his JBL speaker and started playing some music. The vibe was perfect, and we must have been talking and drinking for a good 2 hours. We were all pretty drunk at that point, and I could tell the other guys were just about ready to pack it up for the night. Jackson turned the music down and started collecting discarded beer cans. Just then, a deafening whistle pierced the silence. I nearly jumped out of my seat, going from drunken haze to high alert in a matter of seconds. I don't know how to describe it. The whistle was abnormally loud, but still sounded distant. Jackson quickly shut the speaker off, and the 3 of us sat in silence as we exchanged concerned looks. I could feel my heartbeat pounding through my chest. We sat there, frozen in place, for what seemed like forever, listening intently to our surroundings. But there was nothing. It almost seemed quieter now than it had when we first got there, like eerily quiet. Not even the normal wood sounds you come to anticipate. I used that time to play my memory of the whistle back in my head. It definitely wasn't an animal's noise. The best way I can describe it is a standard whistle you would hear at a ballpark. Chuck finally broke the silence, quietly urging us to pack up and leave. Jackson and I disagreed with that plan, though. we might risk encountering whoever made the noise, which I was beyond terrified of. It was past 3 a.m. at this point, and an encounter this late would only mean trouble. Chuck hypothesized that whoever made that noise was probably aware of our presence, which was a chilling thought. I didn't know what to do. On one hand, staying put violated every survival instinct I had. Backing up and leaving at this hour didn't seem like a much better option either, though. We finally agreed to wait it out. I went to put the fire out, but Chuck cautioned me against it, saying that a fire would repel any dangerous animals. Only then did the true gravity of the situation smack me in the face. We were literally miles away from any civilization. It was 3 a.m., and there was an unknown entity somewhere in the darkness. Another 10 minutes or so passed, and we had resumed talking, but at a much lower volume, with no music. I don't think any of us felt safe going to sleep just yet, though. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. Something small flew over the darkness of Jackson's shoulder and landed directly in the fire. It was a firecracker. I screamed bloody murder as it started sparkling in the fire, and Chuck cursed as he sprung up out of his chair and bolted into the darkness. Jackson and I scrambled to follow, leaving all of our stuff behind. We caught up with Chuck, whose flashlight was beaming wildly through the woods as he frantically sprinted. We ran until we couldn't anymore, and Jackson keeled over and threw up. Chuck shut the light off, and the three of us stood there, panting, trying to figure out if we were being followed. To my surprise, it didn't seem like anyone followed us. I don't think I've ever been so afraid, though. Why in the world would someone have done that? We needed to figure out what to do. Jackson wanted to just find our way out of the woods and never come back. But Chuck was reluctant to leave all of his camping gear behind. Plus, he reminded us the fire was still active. I was dumbfounded. How could he be concerned with forest fires after what had just happened? Eventually, I agreed with Chuck that we should at least check on the site. After all, no one had actually chased us. So there was a slight possibility that whoever threw that firecracker was just playing a cruel prank. Chuck was a navigational expert and was actually able to retrace our footsteps. I could make out the glow of the fire as we quietly approached. Before I could get any closer, though, Jackson put a hand in front of me and pointed with a horrified look on his face. I strained my eyes to make out the sight in the distance. What I saw is probably the most terrifying thing I'd ever laid eyes on. There were 3 people sitting motionlessly in our chairs like statues. The one whose face I could see looked lifeless, and his mouth was hung open. I was afraid to move. What were they even doing? I thought, realizing that they weren't even talking. This was not normal. The 3 of us watched for a little while longer before deciding to back off. We turned to leave, but Jackson's foot clipped a rock, causing him to curse in frustration. Within seconds, the glow from the fire abruptly went dark, as if it had been covered with a cloak. It was freakishly fast. We didn't stick around another second. We again sprinted away from the site, but this time we could hear footsteps crashing behind us. We didn't stop. This time, we bolted out of the woods and ran all the way to Jackson's car. By some miracle, we weren't followed out of the woods. None of us spoke on the drive back, each of us lost in our thoughts. The next day, Chuck insisted we return to the site in the daylight to collect his belongings. Jackson wanted nothing to do with that, but I agreed to accompany Chuck. After some searching, we eventually found the site, which looked mostly untouched. That is, until we got a little closer and noticed the putrid smell coming from Chuck's tent. He unzipped it, and we found a dead, rotting rat. It was sickening. I took the hint and haven't been back to that preserve. This ongoing issue started about a month ago, but let me provide some context first. I'm 24 years old and live with my parents. My family has never been well off, and pretty much all the money I make goes into supporting the household. My relationship with my parents is not the best. We bicker quite often, and whenever I'm not working or hanging out with friends, I tend to keep to myself. I don't want to write a hard luck story or anything like that, but growing up has been tough. Fitness has always been my go-to escape. It helps me clear my mind while also providing a good excuse to leave the house. There's a park about a 10-minute drive from my home that has a workout facility with bars for pull-ups, dips, and other calisthenic exercises. During the summer months, I like to go there to work out because nature helps calm my mind. I prefer going at night since the park gets busy during the day. One night, while my parents were arguing, I decided to slip out and go work out. It was an extremely hot summer night, probably around 85 degrees. I remember breathing in the humid air as I walked from my doorstep to my beat-up white Corolla. I started the rickety engine, rolled down the windows, and let the warm summer breeze flow through my hair. I arrived at the park and noticed I was the only car in the lot. It was probably around 10 or 11 p.m. The park was completely empty at this hour, which I found soothing. It sits on top of a hill that overlooks the downtown area of my city, always adding a pleasant and sentimental emotion to my evenings. I started my workout on the pull-up bar, not really counting repetitions, just going until failure, resting, and repeating. At some point, I took a break to loosen up my arms. Just as I was about to get back on the bar, an indescribable feeling came over me. A subconscious urge forced me to turn around. Standing literally a foot away from my face was a tall, beaten-looking man. I actually screamed and jumped back about 5 feet. He let out a raspy, boisterous laugh and apologized, saying he didn't mean to scare me. His appearance and mannerisms were extremely eccentric. He was almost face to face with me. Something was clearly off about him. I asked why he was so close, and he said he lived there. He explained that he had seen me working out here all the time and asked if I could teach him. I'm a non-confrontational person, and in that moment, I really just wanted to be left alone. I awkwardly but politely told him I was just going to finish my workout and leave. I hopped back on the bar, but his words marinated in my mind. I see you here all the time. I felt his gaze burning into the back of my neck. Even though he made me uneasy, I didn't know how to handle the situation. Then something truly disturbing happened. As I was finishing my set, I heard him mutter my full name. My blood instantly turned cold. I jumped off the bar and slowly backed away. "What?" I asked, my voice shaky. He didn't respond. Instead, he just stared at me with a crazed, wide-eyed smile. I thought I might have been hearing things. It was so bizarre that my mind struggled to process it. A terrible feeling settled in my gut. Something bad was about to happen. Without another word, I quickly walked back to my car. I could feel his eyes on me the entire time, but thankfully, he didn't follow. Before leaving, I glanced back one last time. He was now hanging from the pull-up bar, attempting to mimic my movements. I watched as he grabbed the bar, struggled to pull himself up, then tried again. In the exact position I had just been in, I drove home shaken. The entire ride back, I questioned myself. Did he really say my name? Was I hallucinating? I tried to forget about it, and eventually, I did. The next morning, I woke up early for work. I work construction, so I have to be up before my parents. As I stepped outside, I was the first to notice the unmarked envelope sitting at our front door. It was addressed to me. I picked it up and figured I'd read it later. During my lunch break, while sitting in my car, I finally opened it. I had no idea what to expect, but never in a million years did I think I'd find 10 printed photos of me. They were all taken without my knowledge. One was of me in my car. Another was of me at work. One was of me exercising at the park. My heart pounded as I flipped through the rest. One was of my house. And the worst of all, a photo of me sleeping, taken from outside my window. I nearly choked on my food. Tears welled in my eyes. I felt completely exposed, unsafe. I immediately told my boss something urgent had come up and left work. He wasn't happy, but I didn't care. I took a picture of the photos and drove straight to the police station. I handed them everything and explained my encounter at the park. I described the man in detail. They said they would look into it. I told my parents, and for the first time in a long time, they actually showed me some sympathy. But things only got worse. A couple of nights later, around 3 a.m., there was a knock at the door. I didn't answer, assuming the worst. Another time, I found a sticky note on my car window with a heart drawn in Sharpie. I went back to the police to report the continued harassment. They told me they would open a stalker investigation. I haven't heard anything since, and I know it's hard to build a case without concrete evidence. This happened about a month ago, and ever since, I've been on high alert. My parents are looking for a new home, but it's tough, given our financial situation. I'll update if anything further happens, but until then, I'll continue to sleep with one eye open. I was still in college when this happened. I went to a big party school in upstate New York. I wasn't in a sorority, but I attended a lot of the frat parties. I had a heavy drinking phase in college, unfortunately, but I guess it's good that I got it out of my system. There was an upcoming frat party that my friends, Deanna and Kayla, wanted to go to. I was not one to ever say no to a party unless I was already deathly hungover. And even then, sometimes I'd still go out. I was living in a house off campus with 3 other girls. We weren't a sorority or team house, just 4 friends renting a place together. I believe it was a Kappa Sigma party we were going to. The house was about 20 minutes away from campus. We pre-gamed pretty heavily before calling an Uber, which we all split. On the ride there, we kept drinking. A recipe for disaster. By the time we arrived at the party, I was borderline blacked out. I barely remember the layout of the house. I'd never been to a Kappa Sigma party before, and to this day, I have only vague flashes of memory from that night. I remember a group of frat guys standing out front, a DJ in the living room, and 2 beer pong tables in the kitchen. I was later told that I played beer pong with some random frat guy and ended up talking to him in a corner for a big chunk of the night. But after that, nobody knows where I went. I couldn't even tell you the last thing I remembered before waking up. I came to lying on the grass on the side of a road, dazed. My head was throbbing, and I had to still be somewhat intoxicated. It was pitch black outside. I was lying by a wooded area, away from the university. There wasn't much up there besides trees and the occasional little town. A couple of light posts stood further down the road, so I wasn't in complete darkness. I patted my pockets, searching for my phone, and had a meltdown when I realized they were empty. My crossbody bag was gone. I had absolutely nothing on me. Panic set in. I couldn't even call for help, let alone check the time or figure out where I was. I looked around, but there was nothing nearby. My white shirt was stained with dirt. But that was the least of my worries. I started walking toward the light post, slowly realizing there were no buildings in sight. I was on some completely random back road. I leaned against a pole, trying to figure out what to do. I decided to wait for a car to pass by and ask for help. It took a long time, at least 15 minutes, before I noticed headlights down the road. I stepped onto the pavement, waving my arms and jumping to ensure they saw me. The car slowed to a stop. A man inside rolled down the window and asked if I was all right. I told him I was stranded without a phone and needed a ride home. He told me to get in. I hesitated, but ultimately got in, thanking him profusely. As he drove, he asked how I ended up stranded. I told him I was at a party, and the next thing I knew, I had woken up on the side of the road. In hindsight, I should have kept it vague. I shouldn't have let him know I was vulnerable. He asked why I didn't call for help, and I explained that I lost my phone. He looked at me strangely. That was when I really took in his appearance. He looked about 35, with a thin goatee and a big nose. I gave him my address, and he put it into his GPS. As he started driving, I heard him mutter under his breath, "Okay, here we go." Something felt off. I asked how far we were, and he said, "About 20 minutes." That sounded right. Our house was about that far from the frat house. But as we drove, the road stayed the same. Dark, lined with trees, no signs of town. It felt like we had been driving longer than 20 minutes. I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye and noticed something else. He kept looking at me. Not subtly either. He would turn his whole head to stare at me for a few seconds before looking back at the road. My stomach churned. I asked if he had put the right address in. He said, yes. Then, in his soft, almost whispery voice, he asked, "What color underwear are you wearing?" At the same time, he placed a hand on my knee and started rubbing it. I jerked away, my voice shaking. "Please don't hurt me. I just want to get home safe." "Why would I hurt you?" He replied smoothly. Then, without warning, he pulled onto the grass on the side of the road and put the car in park. He started leaning toward me, reaching his arms out as if to grab me. I didn't let him. I yanked the door handle, threw the door open, and ran into the woods. My air forces made it easier to sprint through the underbrush. I only ran far enough to get out of sight, then crouched behind a tree, covering my mouth to silence my breathing. For the first time, his voice wasn't soft. He shouted into the woods, "Where you at? I just want to..." I didn't hear the rest. My heart was pounding too loudly. I squeezed my eyes shut and stayed frozen. Then a car door slammed. Tires screeched against the road. I waited a little longer before creeping back out, scanning the road to make sure he was truly gone. I felt helpless. I didn't want to risk running into him again. But I needed someone else to help me. I waited just at the edge of the woods for another car to come. Eventually, one did. This time, I made sure it was a different car before stepping out and waving my arms. The driver was another man, a little older, but something about him felt safer. I sat in the back seat this time. I was so shaken up that I barely spoke, only answering his questions about what had happened. Thankfully, he dropped me off at my house. It was around 4 a.m. when I got there. My friends were still awake, waiting for me. They had my phone and my bag. They were about to call the police if I hadn't returned by morning. No one knew who I left with. No one knew how I ended up on the side of the road. The guy I was last seen with at the party claimed he wasn't the one who took me. There's no proof that I left with anyone at all. But that leaves no explanation for how I ended up there. After that night, I cut back heavily on drinking. I never want to be in a situation again where I have to hitchhike to survive. It was a rainy night, and I was driving home from my shift at the late-night diner I work at. It was a quiet shift at work. I had a weird amount of energy still, so I knew I was going to have to pop a melatonin when I got home. I was driving my usual route, a scenic road during the day, but majorly dark at night, lacking many light posts. There's the occasional little parking lot with cute little strips of stores or family-owned restaurants and shops, and then just stretches of nothingness. And by nothingness, I mean forest. Obviously, I was passing one of the aforementioned parking lots of a well-known deli, and under a light post was a woman standing out in the rain with her arm held out. She was waving me down. I slowed as I realized it was a slightly older woman who appeared to be in her mid-50s maybe. This woman was really tall, like 5'11" or 6 feet, but very skinny. I lowered my window and yelled, "Do you need a ride?" She came over to the front door and opened it, chanting how much of a hero I am. I asked where she was heading, and she said, "Just up the road to town." She was soaking wet, getting my car all wet, but I like to think of myself as a good person, and I couldn't, in good conscience, leave another woman out there in the cold rain. However, picking up a random man, on the other hand, would be a different story. The woman seemed sweet, but I noticed as I looked at her while talking to her that she was missing a few teeth. Very, very off-putting. I had to now wonder if she were homeless. She didn't smell or look like a homeless person though, but the rain soaking her and her clothes could have been masking any scent temporarily. Plus, her hair was so wet that what may have usually been scraggly, undone hair could now have been weighted down and straightened by the water. Either way, the woman was smiling the whole time and didn't seem like a threat. We pulled up to an intersection with a gas station on one corner. I pulled in next to a pump. Might as well fill up. I asked her if she wanted anything from inside. I was really doing my good deed for the week, she said. "No thanks, honey." So I went inside to pay the attendant for gas and some spiked seltzers, since tomorrow was the weekend. When I got back to my car, the woman was gone. I looked around the gas station lot real quick, but it was tiny. She was gone. She must have run off somewhere. I felt slightly bad, feeling like she was some lost, helpless woman, but part of me also felt slightly relieved. I filled up the tank of my SUV and was on my way home. When I got back to the house, I went straight inside my apartment. which is the first level of a 2-family house. There's a tenant upstairs and me. The front door into the foyer was usually left unlocked. Then the 2 doors leading to each apartment were locked. I let myself in, out of the rain, and into my apartment. I set the seltzers down on the counter. I wasn't that tired yet, so I took a melatonin and tried to go to bed. Even with the melatonin, though, I was having a hard time sleeping that night. My mind was kind of going wild with thoughts. A lot of thinking about that woman I picked up earlier and what happened to her. At certain points, I heard slight sounds from outside of my bedroom, but I dismissed them as sounds from the upstairs tenant. Boy, do I wish I was more suspicious before falling asleep. I woke up in my dark bedroom, something that usually would never happen when I take a melatonin. I usually sleep like a baby through the night. I sat up, feeling drowsy, feeling really thirsty too. I reached over the table next to my bed for my water. And then I saw and heard something across the room from me. I saw someone crouched in the corner of my bedroom behind a clothing dresser with their legs folded. I had to be hallucinating it. I shook my head violently and made weird noises. I even slapped myself in the face. And now, whoever was in the corner stood up and walked out of the room. I didn't scream. I didn't say a word. I sat in my bed in literal shock. The part that had me questioning my sanity for a bit after the figure was gone was that there wasn't a single sound from outside the room after this. No footsteps, not the sound of a door closing. I grabbed my phone and called my dad. He picked up, confused why I was calling so late. I told him what I had just seen, and he said, "Trish, you probably just had a night terror." I stayed on the phone with him as I was continuing to become more awake, and I left my room and turned on the lights to the living room outside. It was a small space. There was no one in there. I looked around the entire space and could confirm no one was there. I started to believe that maybe I did just hallucinate it. But still, I slept with the bedroom door locked that night. When I woke up in the morning, I drank some coffee and got dressed for the gym. I went to open the door to the foyer and realized it was already unlocked. My heart sank. Last night, what I saw, was it real? I did another look around the apartment, confirming no one was inside. I went out to my car and opened the back door to put my gym bag in the back seat. And that's when I noticed the damp, yellow-brownish stains all over the floor in the back. And my blanket that I always had back there was gone. I wanted to cry or scream. I figured it out. That woman snuck into the back seat last night when I was in the gas station. She either somehow unlocked the door to my apartment, or I mistakenly left it unlocked. I called my dad again, frantically asking him what to do. He said, "Check and make sure nothing was stolen. And if nothing was, then calling the police really wouldn't do anything." I checked the house and didn't find anything to be missing, just my blanket from the car. I skipped the gym that day. In fact, I stayed bottled up in my apartment for a while after that. I was just genuinely disturbed. I didn't want to live there for much longer after that. And so, after that month, I found a new place to live. I was hitchhiking from Leipzig, Germany to Paris when I met him. He was a French man, somewhat dirty and unshaven, small and shabby. He agreed to give me a ride to Paris, where I needed to pick up my paintings from an exhibition. It was October. I was 29 years old, and he seemed about the same age, He spoke broken English. I spoke no French at all. I had no clue who this guy was. The day was mild, sunny, and blue. A warm and comfortable French afternoon, perfect for hitchhiking. It was around 4:30 p.m. when I met him at a gas station somewhere in France. I hopped into his little old car, happy to have scored a ride. We set off toward Paris on the main highway. After some small talk about where I was from, he reached over my lap and opened the glove compartment. He pulled out what looked like a bunch of passports. Then he handed them to me. The first belonged to a pretty girl. "She was my girlfriend," he said. "She died falling off the back of my motorcycle. The second belonged to another young woman. Died in a car crash," he told me. The third girlfriend had succumbed to a brain tumor. The fourth had fallen off a horse. "I'm such an unlucky man," he said. I nodded, uneasy. The uneasiness only grew as the miles rolled on. He was carrying 4 passports from dead women. Soon after, he announced he wanted to take a shortcut to Paris. It wasn't really a question. I assumed we'd cut through charming French villages, past houses and farms. Instead, we turned onto an implausible dirt road off the main highway. I thought. Not good. At first, the road wound through an open field, rolling over the vivid green French hillside. Then, we entered the heavy woods. The road narrowed, and the forest swallowed us in darkness. "I don't want to speak English anymore," he suddenly announced. It was not a request. Then, silence. Uncomfortable silence. I felt the first trickle of adrenaline in my body. My fight or flight instinct was waking up. The sun was fading. The woods grew darker. He seemed tense, lost in deep thought. I noticed his lips moving slightly, as if muttering something. Rigid, snake-like. My hand crept toward the car door handle. A movement I knew he couldn't miss. The car was slowing down. Was I going to die now? Did he have a gun? These questions spun through my mind. My life had turned surreal. This was not my plan. Then something primitive transpired between us. Maybe he sensed my shift, my readiness to fight. I was big and strong then, road tough from my travels. I knew I wouldn't beg. There would be no cries for mercy, not to him. I had my own secret store of rage. A quick, silent calculation passed between us. Could he take me? Was it worth it? The car slowed to a near stop. My pulse pounded. Then, suddenly, he accelerated. Out of the woods. The road widened. The highway appeared. Small houses flickered across the landscape. I had no idea where I was, but I could hear the rush of cars. The man turned to me. "Do you want to spend the night at my house? We could have dinner together." A quick film reel of a filthy torture chamber basement ran through my mind. "No," I said. My first word spoken since his order not to speak English. I truly believe that if I had broken that silence in the woods, if I had shown fear, begged, or spoken too soon, my story might have ended differently. Maybe one of the faces in those passports had begged. Maybe that had fed the killer's darkness. Who really knows? I got out at the side of the highway, watching him drive away into the settling night. I never went to the police. I didn't speak French, and I wasn't sure if my imagination had played tricks on me. I yelled something into the sky, wondering what the hell had just happened. Then I collapsed by the road, exhausted, and slept. The next morning, I woke up, staring at my hands. I was still alive. Jump ahead 20 years. I'm in a cafe in Leipzig, teaching a German business student English. We talk about hitchhiking. I tell him my story. He whips out his smartphone and Googles French serial killers. Then he shows me a picture. It was him, Patrice Allegre. I had never forgotten his face. Back in 1990, a serial killer was leaving bodies along the French roadsides and highways. He was in the middle of his killing spree when I met him. My French girlfriend had warned me about a killer on the loose, but I had been too naive. I've often wondered if the murdered women, and perhaps other men, were buried in those woods we drove through so slowly. I now wish I had gone to the police. I have since tried, but he is in jail now, and they are no longer interested. Maybe I could have stopped more murders back then. That weighs heavy on my soul. And since that day, I have felt the dark light in my body. Maybe the souls of those girls escaped with me, desperate to get out of the forest. This happened a few months ago, and I don't know why I agreed, but I decided to go with my friend Michael to a house party he was attending during our first year of high school. Even though I wasn't invited, Michael was able to pull some strings, and I accepted the invitation. Knowing that I wouldn't be able to drive, I made the choice to go with Michael. When we arrived at the home late at night, Michael told me to leave my phone in the car. He explained that maybe I could lose it or someone I didn't know could try and take it from me while I wasn't looking. At first, I was confused, but I simply nodded, and we got out of the car. I went with Michael into the home, more specifically the backyard, where the party was taking place. I glanced around the backyard and saw people engaging in various activities such as smoking, drinking, and possibly even doing drugs in small groups. Michael had encouraged me to go mingle and say hello to a few people. After a few hours, I realized I had way too much to drink because my vision was completely foggy. After getting closer to the house, I leaned against the wall to support myself. As I did so, I noticed the time on my watch indicated that it was either midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. I knew it was time to leave, so I set out to find Michael, and despite my overwhelming need to collapse, I scanned the yard for him. However, I was unable to locate him. When I asked a few others if they'd seen Michael, they all said they had not. I decided to call Mike to find out where he was. So I reached inside my pocket to feel for my phone, but it wasn't there. I cursed myself in the back of my mind because I realized that I had left my phone in Michael's car, which had disappeared with him. I realized there was only one way to get home, which was walking. Because I remembered my house wasn't too far from this house. The night was chilly because it was fall. I thought about just asking someone else to take me home. But I didn't know anyone else that could help, so I stuck with my idea of walking home in the darkness by myself. I then got to the road and started stumbling down the street. I knew I had too many drinks because I felt lightheaded and dizzy. A few minutes later, I made it to the main area of the street and kept walking. I lazily started thinking about a bunch of different things, like why Michael decided to leave me alone at the party, or why I decided to listen to Michael's idiotic idea of leaving my phone in his car, so I couldn't call him or anyone else. I started cursing myself for being so careless with my drinking and even getting drunk, knowing I shouldn't have done that. I stopped walking on the side of the road because I was getting tired and crossed my arms over my chest tightly to keep myself warm. Then I remembered something I could do. Hitchhiking. I held out my arm and stuck out my thumb, hoping someone else could see me. I watched as a couple of cars drove past me. but they wouldn't stop. As minutes ticked by, I started feeling uneasy, thinking I would have to start walking again. It was past 1 in the morning, and there were a few cars driving past me, but no one was stopping because they either didn't notice me or didn't care. I hesitated and thought about walking home again, but I realized that in my drunken state, it would be too daunting. I was still holding out my thumb when a grey truck pulled up and stopped in front of me. I smiled as I stumbled toward the vehicle. The window rolled down, and an older-looking man with a beard asked me if I needed a ride. I told him yes, and then told him where my house was before getting into the truck, feeling grateful for the ride. As we started driving down the road, the man started trying to make small talk with me, asking what happened to me. However, I was too disoriented to have an actual conversation with him. The only things I could manage to say were low mumbles or just murmurs and groans. As we turned the corner to my street, away from the party, I started feeling uneasy. For some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was strange about this man. Suddenly, we drove past my house. I told the man that we had just driven past it, and I felt my gut telling me to get out. But I couldn't, because I was too drunk to move. I was about to tell the man to let me out before we got too far away from my house, when suddenly the man turned to me, and I noticed he had a sinister look on his face. You know, you shouldn't be drunk while you're hitchhiking because you'd make a very easy target, the man said, smirking darkly. The man reached over and started rubbing my leg, and I didn't know what he was trying to do, but I knew it probably wasn't anything good. Before he could do anything else to me, we both heard a loud siren behind the car, and then a flashing red and blue light flooded the night. I realized it was the police, and I jumped for joy inside. The man panicked and stopped, unlocking the doors, which allowed me to jump out of the car. I ran as fast as I could, and the police officer rushed over to me. I told him the entire story about what happened to me. Unfortunately, nothing illegal had happened per se. The police officer told me that he was looking for someone in a grey truck who had apparently stolen something from a store. I'm not sure if it was the man who picked me up or someone else, but I was just glad the police officer stopped the car. The cop gave me a ride home, and I decided from there on that I wouldn't get so drunk that I couldn't think straight. I now know the importance of being responsible and staying aware of my surroundings, even when having a good time.
I'm 22 years old, fresh out of college, and I recently got a job at my old high school as a sort of computer intern in the school basement. The basement of the school is very messy and disorganized, but there is a small 3-person office that's actually very nice down there. It has 3 nice big desks, 2 mini fridges, a flat screen TV mounted on the wall, and oh so satisfying, air conditioning. A luxury the students and teachers cannot enjoy in the school. And of course, all the school servers and other computery stuff. I got the job because 3 of my old computer teachers flat out adored me. I could actually consider them as real friends, not just teacher figures, so they all helped tremendously in landing me this job. It's been great until something happened a few weeks ago. My 2 co-workers that shared the office with me, Dave and Gary, weren't in the office at the time. They were upstairs working on papers or whatever. I was eating my sandwich during my lunch break when I got a phone call from one of the women in the front office telling me the school was on lockdown and that somebody, possibly armed, had entered the school. There wasn't much that I could do other than turn off the lights because, surprisingly, as nice as this little office was, it didn't have an actual door to it, just a big opening. And the door to the whole basement didn't even have a working lock. For my own safety, I turned off all the lights in the office and my computer screen. I kept my phone on the desk, texting both Gary and Dave, but they wouldn't respond. I sat down there in the dark, playing games on my phone for like 20 minutes, waiting for the call from up front to tell me to resume working. I had no idea what was happening. I couldn't hear what was going on upstairs from down here, but I was not allowed to make any calls until I was informed that the lockdown was over. Then, the noisy basement door opened and the creaking echoed across the basement and into my office. I sat up from my seat, wondering if I should call out for Gary or Dave. I was eager to get some information from them. Someone then came running down the stairs, and their footsteps were approaching my office. I pushed away my chair and crawled under my desk. Somebody entered the office, but did not turn on the lights. There was just silence. I can't even describe the fear I was experiencing. I felt like if I made one sudden noise, I'd be a dead man. Suddenly, my phone dinged. As I got a text message, I felt my entire world shrivel up and die at that one moment as I clenched my teeth in fear. Footsteps suddenly moved closer to me until I finally dove out from under the desk in capitulation, begging whoever it was not to kill me. And just then, someone grabbed my arm and pulled me up. It was some guy in a red plaid, button-up, jeans, and a reddish-black cap. He told me, "It's okay, I'm just down here hiding with you. What's going on up there?" I whispered to him. He kind of ignored my question and asked me if there was an exit down here. I told him, "Yeah, around that way." Before he could do anything else, I asked him, "Who are you?" There was a brief moment of silence before he started explaining. He was coming in to pick up his son when a teacher told him to hide. After his explanation, I checked my phone and saw that the text I received was from Dave. It said, "Dude, this is crazy. Some guy with a gun shot Mr. Buckley. He's wearing a red shirt and hat. Whatever you do, don't come upstairs." I was about to reread that text out loud to the man until I realized. I looked up and felt my stomach sink. The man seemed to catch on to my suspicious stare. Panicking, all I could think to do was run for the upstairs. A gunshot echoed through the basement, and I could hear the bullet ricochet off something metal in the darkness. But thank God, the bullet missed me, and I made it upstairs. Fortunately, police were waiting at all exits, including the basement exit, and caught the man the second he opened the door. More good news. Our teacher, Mr. Buckley, survived the gunshot. It was later determined that the man and Mr. Buckley had some beef for whatever reason, but that was never, ever revealed. All we know is that Mr. Buckley couldn't have done anything that would have warranted this kind of reaction. And I know that the sound of that gunshot will forever echo in my mind. It was a typical boring day in calculus, only it was Friday, 7th period, meaning the week was almost over and spring break would finally be upon us. So, everybody was getting antsy in their seats, I could tell. We didn't have a test that day, like a lot of my friends did with the other teachers. So our teacher, in the middle of class, just decided to start playing games with us on Sporkle.com. He was a very laid-back teacher like that. As we were doing some brand logo quiz on Sporkle, I remember the exact moment it happened. Right after my friend answered a question, I remember the exact answer too. Adidas. The dean's voice came through the loudspeaker. He sounded panicked and frantic as he told all the teachers this was not a drill and to go into lockdown. I actually got chills and I got goosebumps on my arms as our usually laid-back teacher too seemed panicked as he ran to turn off the lights and ushered us to the back corner of the room. We all sat in silence for about 2 minutes, and then the usual buzzing that came from a panel in the back of the room ceased, indicating that the school must have cut all the power. We all looked at each other, realizing this must be serious. A few more minutes of waiting later, we heard a man screaming at the top of his lungs coming down the hallway. 2 girls in the class actually started crying, which made all of us even more scared. As the screaming got closer to the classroom, the lunatic-sounding man started banging on the lockers while screaming, "I'll kill all of you!" It was at that moment that I started to fear for my life. My teacher shushed us as we all looked at each other to see our peers' reactions. The banging then moved from the lockers to our classroom door, and that's when one of the crying girls screamed, "No!" The banging on the door only grew worse as the man started screaming, "Open up!" 2 of the girls in the class were crying out loud now. It felt like an eternity that man was pounding at the door, but eventually he finally continued down the hallway, screaming like a mentally insane person until we could not hear him anymore. I'd say 10 minutes later, though it felt like half an hour given the situation, the dean came back on the loudspeaker explaining the situation, which was surprising for him to do. He explained that some apparently mentally unstable person entered the building and assaulted the woman sitting at the front desk, causing her to flee the building screaming. The staff wasn't sure if the man was armed or not. Now, this was before the school had cameras or could afford proper security, so the school was wide open to something like this happening. The staff had done a sweep of all the hallways and classrooms and couldn't find him. So the dean instructed the teachers to resume teaching, but to keep all the doors locked and to not let any students leave for any reason. The most disturbing part, however, is that one of the janitors working the night shift found the man sleeping in one of the storage closets near the back end of the school. According to rumors that were spread by my peers, sticking out of his pocket was a .44 Magnum. The janitor must have done something stupid to wake him up. For example, leaving the closet door open because by the time a police officer could arrive on the scene, the man was gone. My entire class, as far as I know to this day, has no idea if this man was ever found. But I like to think that right now he's being given the proper help that he needs. My school has 2 lunch periods. The first lunch period is for all 6th graders and some 7th graders. The second lunch period is for the other half of the 7th graders and all 8th graders. The lockdown happened in the beginning of October. The day the lockdown occurred, it was overcast and rainy. During the first lunch period, I heard 4 loud booms. I personally thought it was thunder, but the entire lunch crowd started screaming. I was thinking those kids were just serious overreactors, but the campus security came in and started yelling at people to go into the multi-purpose room. The kids who were in line buying lunch had to throw out their lunch and come inside. Me and some friends went inside the room, along with a huge group of other kids. Everyone was curious as to what was happening. Our multi-purpose room is huge, and the back wall of the room is made of see-through glass. When me and my friends were rushed inside, the campus security was covering the glass with the curtains, and there were adults at every exit. My friend Eric was curious, as well as the rest of us, so he asked one of the adults what was going on. When he came back, he said, "You know how right in front of TMS, there's those houses?" I replied, "Yeah. There's this mentally disabled crazy man that barricaded himself in front of his house, and he's threatening to commit suicide and kill the cops if he's evicted. He was walking around outside of school, watching kids in a weird way," Eric told us. It turned out the man was also a registered sex offender, making matters worse. We were stuck in the multi-purpose room for a whole hour, taking up 2 periods. After the whole thing was settled, we were escorted to our classrooms one by one. I later found out that the man lived next to my friend Brandy, who told me about the previous Halloween when she saw the same man at his window cutting his arm and writing in his own blood, "Don't come here or I'll kill you," on his window. Of course, being Halloween, people, including Brandy, assumed it was just for the holiday. But after this horrific incident, we knew this man was truly disturbed and were glad he never got near us.
It's strange how the city that never sleeps can feel so empty. New Year's Eve in New York City is a raucous symphony of cheering crowds, honking horns, and the occasional drunken serenade. But up here, 20 floors above the chaos, it's just me. The office is quiet, save for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. I should have been with friends, or at least sipping champagne at home while watching the ball drop on TV. Instead, I was here, poring over spreadsheets and ledgers to close the books for the year. Being the manager of a mid-sized finance company meant that when deadlines loomed, my social life took a back seat. Everyone else had left by 5 p.m., eager to escape before the city descended into its annual madness. Even the cleaning staff had clocked out early, leaving the office eerily sterile and devoid of life. I didn't mind, or at least I told myself I didn't. I liked the quiet. But the quiet has a way of shifting, morphing into something heavier when you're alone. By the time the clock hit 10 p.m., I was neck-deep in reconciling accounts. The glow of the computer screen painted the room in cold light. The windows framed the distant glitter of the city, but up here, I may as well have been on the moon. I heard it then, a noise faint but unmistakable, a muffled thump. I froze, fingers hovering over the keyboard. My first thought was the HVAC system. It had been acting up lately, coughing and groaning like an old man. But this sound was different, deliberate. A rhythmic scuff, like footsteps, faint but steady. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I'd left a window cracked somewhere and the wind had nudged a door. Or maybe the building itself was just settling. Then I heard it again. Closer. I stood up, my heart hammering against my ribs. The floor was supposed to be empty. I hadn't seen anyone else in the lobby when I came in, and the elevator required a key card for after-hours access. Grabbing my phone, I turned on the flashlight and stepped into the hallway. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating rows of cubicles and the break room door, slightly ajar. The air felt different out here, colder, heavier, like the building itself was holding its breath. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding weaker than I intended. No response. I inched toward the break room, each step a battle against the knot of fear tightening in my chest. As I reached the door, I pushed it open slowly, the hinges whining in protest. The room was empty, save for the faint smell of burnt coffee. I was about to turn back when I noticed something strange. The window by the sink was open, wide open. The January air seeping through it felt like ice against my skin. Someone was here. A sound from the far end of the hallway made me spin around, my flashlight catching the edge of movement. Just a flicker, like the tail of a shadow disappearing around a corner. "Hey, who's there?" I cursed myself for the panic in my voice. I sounded more like prey than someone in charge. Footsteps echoed in the darkness now, quick and purposeful. I followed them, my pulse thundering in my ears. When I reached the corner, I stopped, pressing my back against the wall. Slowly, I peeked around, and there he was. A man dressed in dark clothing stood by the office supply closet. His back was to me, but I could see the bulging bag slung over his shoulder and the glint of metal at his waist. A gun. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to back away, to run. But my phone vibrated in my hand. A notification, or maybe an accidental brush of my thumb, and the faint sound shattered the silence. The man spun around. His face was sharp and unshaven, his eyes narrow and gleaming with something between anger and desperation. He didn't say a word. He just raised the gun and pointed it at me. "Turn around," he growled. "Hands where I can see them." I did as he said, my thoughts racing. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like me. Wallet. Now. I fumbled to pull my wallet from my pocket, my fingers trembling. I tossed it to the floor. He motioned with the gun. The phone, too. I hesitated. If I gave him my phone, I couldn't call for help. But the weight of the gun in his hand was a persuasive argument. Reluctantly, I dropped the phone beside the wallet. "Good," he muttered. He backed away slowly, his bag jangling with what sounded like electronics, probably laptops or other devices from the office. My mind raced. He must have broken in through the window. But how did he bypass the building's security? As he neared the stairwell, he paused. "Don't move. Don't call anyone. You do, and I'll know." With that, he disappeared into the stairwell, leaving the door swinging on its hinges. I stood there for what felt like hours, my body rooted to the spot. Eventually, I found the courage to move. I locked the office door behind me and called the police from a desk phone. By the time the officers arrived, the man was long gone. They took my statement, asking questions I couldn't fully answer. Had I seen his face clearly? Did he say anything that might indicate who he was? What had he stolen? I spent the next few days replaying the incident in my mind, dissecting every detail. Something about the man had felt familiar, though I couldn't place why. Then, a week later, the pieces fell into place. The police found the stolen items listed for sale online, traced to an account registered under a name I recognized: Ethan Harper. He was one of our newest hires, a quiet guy who kept to himself. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. He'd been in the office that afternoon, chatting with a coworker about plans for the new year. I'd even wished him a happy holiday as he left. The police arrested him at his apartment. He confessed quickly, explaining that he'd overheard me talking about staying late to close the books. He'd planned everything, breaking in through the fire escape, knowing the security cameras were down for maintenance. I tried not to think about what might have happened if I'd made a wrong move that night. The office felt different after that, like it had absorbed the tension and fear of that night. I couldn't look at the break room window without remembering the cold wind on my face. New Year's Eve would never feel the same. When someone knocks on your door in the middle of a blizzard, you answer. That was the rule my mother always followed, but one New Year's Eve, that rule almost destroyed us. Growing up in rural Minnesota had its perks. The vast grove behind our house, barns to explore, and tractors to climb. My siblings and I made endless memories there, but living 3 miles outside a tiny town with fewer than 1,000 people could feel lonely. During storms, that loneliness turned into isolation. That winter was one of the harshest I remember. Temperatures plummeted below -50 degrees Fahrenheit, and snow piled high enough to bury cars. When the blizzard hit on New Year's Eve, my dad, a state trooper, was called out to work. We knew he wouldn't be home until the storm passed, and my mom prepared for a long night with just the 3 of us kids. She brought sleeping bags into the living room, popped in a movie, and tried to make the night festive despite the raging storm outside. We were settling in when the knock came. It wasn't gentle. It was urgent, loud, and insistent. My mom froze. We kids peered into the kitchen, watching as she stood by the door, her hand hovering over the lock. She'd always been cautious, especially when Dad wasn't home. But in a blizzard, anyone outside could be in danger. She turned the lock and opened the door a crack. A man stood there, tall and broad, his face partially obscured by a fur-lined hood. Snow clung to his coat, and his boots were caked in ice. His voice carried over the howling wind. "Please, ma'am, my car's stuck. Can I come in?" My mom hesitated, but the cold was unforgiving. She stepped aside, letting him in. The man stomped the snow off his boots and shed his heavy coat, revealing a rough, weathered face and dark eyes that seemed too calm for someone caught in a storm. "Thank you," he said, flashing a toothy grin. "It's brutal out there." My mom nodded but didn't smile. "You're lucky to have found a house out here," she said. "Where's your car?" He waved a hand vaguely backward. "Didn't think I'd make it." Something about him unsettled me. He was too calm, too comfortable, as if he belonged here. But my mom, always polite, gestured toward the fireplace to warm up. My brother, sister, and I stayed on the couch, watching him cautiously. "What are your kids' names?" he asked, turning his attention to us. Mom's smile was tight. "They're just excited for New Year's. We're having a movie night. What about you? What's your name, sweetheart?" "Alina," I said before my mom could answer for me. His smile widened and my stomach twisted. "Alina," he repeated softly, as if testing the name. "That's a beautiful name." The unease in the room grew thicker. My mom noticed it too. She stood abruptly. "I'll make some tea, you must be cold." As she busied herself in the kitchen, the man kept talking to us. He asked about our favorite games, whether we liked the snow, and if we'd ever been sledding at night. My brother answered politely, but my sister stayed silent, her eyes darting nervously to Mom. I tried to focus on the movie, but I could feel his eyes on me. "You know," he said suddenly, "I've got kids too. A little girl about Alina's age." "That's nice," my mom called from the kitchen, her voice strained. The man leaned back in his chair, studying me. "I bet you'd get along with her. She's sweet like you. Loves the snow. I'll bet you'd like where I live. It's out in the country. Lots of space to play." "I like it here," I said firmly. His grin faltered for a moment before returning, wider than before. "Of course you do, princess." My mom returned with the tea, handing him a steaming cup. "The storm should ease up by morning," she said, her tone firmer now. "You're welcome to stay on the couch until then." "That's mighty kind of you," he said, sipping the tea. "But I was hoping to hit the road sooner. Wouldn't want to impose." "You'd freeze out there," she replied. "You should rest." The man nodded, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're right. Best to stay put." We kids went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. Something about him felt wrong. I kept hearing his voice in my head, the way he said my name, the way he watched me. Hours later, I woke to a faint creaking sound. The living room was dark, but moonlight reflected off the snow outside, casting an eerie glow. I peeked out of my sleeping bag and saw him moving through the shadows. He was at the front door, slowly turning the lock. Fear gripped me. He wasn't leaving. He was unlocking the door to let someone in. I nudged my mom, whispering urgently. She woke instantly, her eyes narrowing as she saw him at the door. Quietly, she grabbed the heavy flashlight she'd kept nearby and stood. "What are you doing?" she asked sharply. The man froze, his hand still on the lock. He turned slowly, his smile gone. "Just checking the door," he said. "Didn't want it to freeze shut." "It's fine," she said firmly. "Come back to the couch." He hesitated, then nodded and stepped away from the door. My mom didn't move until he was back on the couch. The rest of the night was tense. My mom didn't sleep, and neither did I. The man stayed on the couch, but I could feel the danger radiating from him. At dawn, the blizzard eased. My mom told the man it was safe to leave. He didn't argue. As he put on his coat, he turned to me one last time. "Maybe I'll see you again, Alina," he said, his grin sending a shiver down my spine. After he left, my mom locked the door and called the police. When officers arrived, they confirmed our fears. The man's car hadn't broken down. In fact, there was no car. He had been walking through the storm, targeting isolated homes. They found rope and duct tape in his bag, tools for taking someone. That New Year's Eve, we learned how close we'd come to disaster. The man wasn't just a stranded traveler. He was an intruder, one who had planned to take me or my siblings. And if my mom hadn't been cautious, we might never have seen the new year. December 31st, 2019, the last day of the year. For most people, it was a time of celebration, parties, and resolutions. For me, it was just another day, another reminder of what I had lost. My husband, Michael, had died the year before in a snowstorm. That endless, biting wind had taken him from me, and I had lived alone ever since, in a small house tucked away in a quiet corner of Canada. I always spent winters with my parents in Skagway, Alaska. It was our tradition. They had an old, cozy home surrounded by dense woods, the perfect place to escape the harshness of life. But last night, a snowstorm roared through my area, and I found myself trapped inside. The storm rattled the windows and howled like a wild beast outside. I stayed in my bedroom on the first floor, sipping tea and trying to ignore the loneliness that settled over me like the snow outside. Around midnight, a strange sound pierced through the chaos of the storm, the creak of a door opening. My breath caught in my throat. I was certain I had locked all the doors. I tiptoed to my bedroom door and strained to hear over the wind. The sound didn't repeat, but my imagination ran wild. I stayed awake for hours, my ears tuned to every creak and groan of the house. Morning came, and when I finally ventured downstairs, the front door was locked, just as I'd left it. I laughed nervously to myself, brushing it off as the wind. "You're being paranoid," I muttered. With the storm subsided, I packed my things, eager to leave the house behind for a while. I loaded my car, double-checked the locks, and began the long drive to my parents' home. The journey was uneventful until I arrived in Skagway late that evening. The road to my parents' house ended at the edge of the forest. From there, a narrow, snow-laden path wound between tall, shadowy trees. It was always a peaceful walk. But that night, The air felt different, heavier. As I trudged through the snow, dragging my suitcase behind me, I noticed a figure ahead. A man in a hoodie stood among the trees, watching me. His face was obscured by the shadow of his hood, but his posture was tense, deliberate. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart pounding. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. He didn't respond, just stared. There was something eerily familiar about him, but I couldn't place it. After a moment, he turned and walked deeper into the woods, vanishing from sight. I hurried the rest of the way to my parents' house, my mind racing. Who was he? Why did he seem so familiar? For the next few days, I tried to push the memory of the hooded man out of my mind. My parents' house was warm and welcoming, and it felt good to be surrounded by family. But the unease lingered. Then my boss called. "We're facing some unexpected issues," he explained. "I'm sorry, but we need you back. Can you cut your vacation short?" Reluctantly, I packed up and drove back home. It was late evening when I started, and by the time I arrived, it was nearly 2 a.m. The house greeted me with an unsettling stillness, as if it had been waiting. I stepped inside and immediately noticed something strange. A pair of coffee cups sat on the living room table. I distinctly remembered washing and putting them away before I left. My stomach tightened. Was someone here while I was gone? Or had I just forgotten? The thought of being so careless bothered me almost as much as the idea of an intruder. Shaking it off, I went upstairs and locked my bedroom door. Sleep came fitfully, and at 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of crying. It was faint at first, like a whisper carried on the wind. I sat up, my heart racing. It was coming from downstairs. As I strained to listen, the sound grew louder, more distinct. A low, mournful sobbing echoed through the house. My blood ran cold as I recognized the voice. It sounded like Michael. I leaped out of bed, barely bothering to grab a flashlight. I rushed downstairs, calling his name, even though I knew it couldn't be him. The living room was empty. The crying stopped abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. I turned to head back upstairs, but as I reached the bottom step, I froze. Footsteps behind me. I spun around, and there he was, the man from the woods. He stood in the dim light of the living room, his hood pushed back to reveal his face. It was Michael, but it wasn't. His skin was pale, his eyes hollow and unblinking. Frost clung to his hair and eyelashes, and his lips were tinged blue. He stared at me with an expression that was almost sorrowful. But there was something else beneath it, a darkness, an unnatural hunger. I stumbled backward, my knees buckling. The room spun, and I hit the floor hard. When I woke, sunlight streamed through the windows. I was lying on the living room floor, my body aching from the fall. The house was silent, the air heavy with an unnatural stillness. I sat up slowly, my mind reeling. Had it been a dream? A hallucination? I scoured the house from top to bottom, but there was no sign of anyone else. No wet footprints, no frost, nothing. The coffee cups were still on the table, and everything else was exactly as I had left it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That afternoon, I packed a bag and left the house. I didn't care about work or the possibility of losing my job. I just needed to be somewhere else, anywhere else. I called my friend Helena, who lived in a nearby apartment complex. She welcomed me with open arms, no questions asked. As I settled into her spare bedroom that evening, I felt a small measure of relief. The house was behind me, and with it, whatever had haunted me. But even now, as I write this, I can't help but wonder. Was it really Michael? If it was, what did he want? Why? Why did he come back? And most chilling of all, will he come back again? I'm not sure I want to know the answer. Before we get into the next story, if you've come for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share these stories with your friends and family. Thanks.
10 years ago, I worked as a security guard to pay off my education. It wasn't the most exciting job in the world, nor the most sexy one. I got bored a lot. It was at the Royal Museum in Brussels, the Musical Instruments Museum to be precise. So imagine a museum that only exhibits old musical instruments from all around the world. During the day, the museum was open for visitors, and sometimes it stayed open for company seminars during the evening. I was some sort of all-around guard, so I could fill the position I wanted around the day. During one particular seminar, I got control room duty with one of my colleagues. We were sitting in a dark control room, monitoring everyone through the security cameras. The exhibition rooms were open for the employees of the company that rented the museum for that evening. Now and then, I left my colleague alone to make an observation tour around the museum and check up on my other colleagues. That evening, the exhibition would close at 10 p.m. There were 4 exhibition rooms, each on another floor, so we would clear every room with 2 or 3 guards. We always started at the highest floor and worked our way down. We used a waterproof system to make sure everyone left the exhibition. After we closed off the last exhibition room, I returned to my colleague in the control room to check up on the party they were having on the rooftop of the museum. The other guards went home, and our superior joined us in the control room with a plate of the same snacks they were having on the rooftop. I was watching the cameras because it's always entertaining to watch people's behavior at events like this. Suddenly, I saw movement in the upper exhibition room, a glimpse of a woman that passed by a camera. I said, "We have to go back. Seems like we missed someone." At first, they thought I was messing with them. I said, "No, I'm serious. There was a woman." So, my superior and I headed back to that one room. While we were standing in the elevator, our colleague in the control room said over the walkie-talkie that he couldn't see anyone on camera, but all the rooms have a dead corner. Upon entering the room, all we saw were the old harps, flutes, and pianos being displayed. So I went one way, my superior the other, until we reached the back of the room and no one was there. I got chills because I was sure I saw someone. We headed back down, and the very second we entered the control room, the alarm went off in the same exhibition room. We went back and checked the whole place a second time, but the room was empty. Fast forward a month later, there was another late-night seminar. This time, after the rooms were closed, I saw the face of an Asian man staring into the camera. He was standing behind Tibetan prayer bells, or so it seemed. Standing is a big word. It was just a face with no body underneath it. The lights were already dimmed. It was late, and I had a long day behind me, so I won't say it couldn't just be my imagination, but I never saw the same shape or anything that looked like a face ever again. The last event, not sure how to call these things, happened a few months after the other ones. Again, another late-night seminar was going on, one with a concert in the concert hall of the museum. Behind the concert hall, we had our break room where we could go one by one to eat a warm meal and have a small break. We couldn't go through the concert hall, so we had to take a staff elevator somewhere in the back of the museum. We had to walk through a lonesome, badly lit hallway to reach that elevator. I had just finished my meal when my colleague contacted me over the walkie-talkie to come to the control room. So I stepped into the elevator and pushed the button for the floor where the control room was. The elevator went down, and when I was finally about to reach my floor, it didn't stop. Instead, it descended to the basement. I was a bit scared at that point because I knew no one was there at that time of day, and that place was a labyrinth. The elevator stopped and the doors opened. I quickly pushed the button to go up again, but the doors wouldn't close. For a few moments, I was staring into the blackest darkness I had ever seen. I kept ramming the button, but it didn't close. My walkie-talkie made some noise, and finally the doors closed. The basement scene in the horror movie Annabelle gave me chills the first time I saw it because it was so similar, except for the baby carriage and the demon. So I got out on the floor I was heading to, but first I had to walk through a little dark movie theater before I could reach the hallway. At first, I didn't want to go through it, but the elevator door closed behind me and descended back to the basement. I took a deep breath and ran through the dark theater as fast as my legs could carry me through the badly lit hallway. I was so happy when I finally reached the control room, where I found my colleague and superior waiting for me. I didn't tell them what happened, but soon after that, I stopped working for the museum and started my education. I was determined that I would never work as a security guard ever again. In my late teens, I worked part-time doing maintenance at a cemetery. Most of my tasks were simple: mowing the grass, fixing fences, and keeping the place tidy. It was peaceful work, and I didn't mind being alone. The cemetery wasn't far from my house, and I knew every corner of it. But one night, something happened that I'll never forget. It was late summer, and the weather had been unpredictable all day. The sky was overcast, and the air felt heavy. I was finishing my last task, a fence repair near the back of the cemetery. By the time I packed up my tools, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving only a faint glow in the sky. I wasn't scared of the dark, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to hurry. As I walked back toward the small maintenance shed near the front gate, a storm rolled in. It started with distant thunder, low and rumbling, followed by flashes of lightning that lit up the sky. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. Within minutes, the downpour began. Fat raindrops fell so fast that they soaked through my clothes in seconds. I wasn't prepared for it, and there was no time to run back home. The nearest shelter was a bus stop just outside the cemetery gate. It wasn't much, just a small covered bench, but it was better than standing in the rain. The fastest way to get there was to cut straight through the cemetery. I'd walked that path 100 times before, even in the dark. But tonight, the storm made everything feel different. The lightning flashed in quick bursts, illuminating the rows of headstones and casting eerie shadows across the ground. Between the flashes, the world seemed to vanish into complete darkness. The rain was so heavy that it blurred my vision, and every step felt like I was walking through a river. My boots squelched in the mud as water pooled around the graves. I tried to keep my focus on the bus stop in the distance, but the storm distorted everything. Shapes that should have been familiar looked strange. Trees swayed violently in the wind, their branches clawing at the sky. The thunder was so loud it drowned out the sound of my footsteps. I told myself to keep moving, but something about the night felt wrong, like I wasn't alone. Then it happened. I stepped forward, expecting solid ground beneath me, but instead, I fell. My foot hit the air, and I went tumbling down. It happened so quickly that I didn't have time to react. One moment I was running through the cemetery, and the next I was lying in a pool of freezing water. It took me a second to realize what had happened. I had fallen into an open grave. The grave must have been dug earlier that day, and the rain had filled it with water and mud. The walls were steep and slick, offering nothing to hold on to. I scrambled to stand up, but my hands and feet slipped on the wet earth. The muddy water clung to my clothes, making it harder to move. I could feel my heart pounding as I tried to climb out. Lightning lit up the sky again, and for a moment, I saw the world outside the grave. The headstones looked twisted and unfamiliar in the storm's light. Shadows danced across the ground, and in the corner of my eye, I thought I saw something move. I froze, holding my breath. But when the lightning stopped, everything went dark again. The next few minutes felt like hours. Every time I tried to climb out, the mud gave way beneath me. The rain kept pouring, and I could hear water rushing around me. My mind began to play tricks. In the darkness, I imagined hands reaching for me or faces staring down from the edge of the grave. The storm's noise made it hard to tell what was real. Finally, I found a small foothold in the mud. With all the strength I had, I pulled myself up, inch by inch, until I was able to grab onto the edge. My arms burned as I hoisted myself out of the grave and rolled onto the wet grass. I lay there for a moment, catching my breath, rain pounding against my face. When I stood up, I felt like a different person. My clothes were soaked and covered in mud, and I shivered as the wind cut through me. The cemetery looked even stranger now, with pools of water reflecting the flashes of lightning. I didn't waste any time. I walked as fast as I could toward the gate, not looking back. By the time I reached the bus stop, the storm began to ease. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and the thunder moved farther away. I sat on the bench, dripping wet and shaking, replaying what had just happened in my mind. I told myself it was just an accident, that there was nothing to be afraid of. But even now, years later, I can't forget the way the night felt. The cemetery, once familiar and quiet, had turned into something I didn't recognize. And though I've visited many times since that night, I never walked through it after dark. I used to work night shifts in a call center in Hyderabad. The office was in a new building that people whispered was haunted. At first, I didn't believe in ghosts or anything supernatural. I thought it was just gossip, but as time went by, strange things began to happen. People said noises were coming from one of the floors. The strange part, that floor was supposed to be empty at night. No one worked there, and the lights were always turned off. Yet, some of my co-workers claimed they heard faint whispers, footsteps, or even laughter when they worked late. I laughed it off. It's probably the wind, I told myself. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling when I passed that floor on my way to the cafeteria or the restroom. Then there was the bathroom. It had been closed for a while because of a faulty flush. No matter how often the plumbers came, they couldn't fix it. Even after the water supply was cut off, people swore they could still hear the sound of the flush late at night. We joked about it, saying maybe a ghost with a bad stomach lived there. But when strange things happen repeatedly, jokes don't feel funny anymore. One night, I was at my desk dealing with the usual angry customers on the phone. My friend Priya came over and said she was feeling tired. She wanted to rest for a while in the sick room. The sick room was a small space with a bed, a blanket, and a chair. It was meant for employees who didn't feel well and needed to lie down. She left her phone on the desk by mistake, and after about 15 minutes, I noticed it. I thought it would be nice to take it to her. Also, I could use an excuse to stretch my legs and get away from work for a bit. When I entered the sick room, the dim light from the hallway barely lit the space. The blanket on the bed looked like someone was lying under it, their body outlined in a peaceful curve. That must be Priya, I thought. I quietly placed her phone on the small table beside the bed and stepped out, careful not to wake her. But as I closed the door behind me, I saw Priya walking toward me from the cafeteria. She looked confused. "What are you doing near the sick room?" she asked. I froze. "What do you mean? Aren't you lying down inside?" She shook her head. "No, I was just grabbing some coffee." My heart began to race. "But I just left your phone next to you. Someone's in there." We both stared at each other for a moment, trying to make sense of what was happening. Then, without saying another word, we rushed back to the sick room. I pushed the door open, and the sight inside made my stomach drop. The bed was empty. The blanket, which I was sure had been covering someone just a minute ago, was neatly folded at the foot of the bed. The air in the room felt strangely cold, even though the AC wasn't on. I reached for the phone I had left. It was still there, sitting on the table like nothing had happened. Priya and I didn't say anything. We just stood there, staring at the bed. The longer I looked, the more I felt like the walls were closing in. The silence in the room was heavy, pressing down on my chest. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, loud and fast. And then we ran. Neither of us looked back. We didn't stop until we were back at our desks, gasping for air. We tried to laugh it off, telling ourselves that maybe I had imagined the shape under the blanket. But we both knew it wasn't just my imagination. Something or someone had been in that room that night. I couldn't focus on my work. Every sound in the office felt louder, sharper, and more menacing. Even the hum of the air conditioning made my skin crawl. Priya stayed close to me for the rest of the shift, and neither of us dared to go near the sick room again. Over the next few weeks, I noticed more and more co-workers talking about strange experiences in the building. One person said they heard footsteps following them down the empty hallway. Another said they saw a shadow move across the floor, even though there was no one else around. As for me, I started avoiding certain parts of the office altogether. I made sure I was never the last person to leave my desk or the cafeteria, and I never stepped into the sick room again. One night, about a month after the incident, I heard the sound of the flush coming from the closed bathroom. I was walking past it on my way to the break room. The noise stopped me in my tracks. For a second, I thought about going in, just to prove to myself that there was nothing to be afraid of. But I couldn't do it. The fear was too strong. I turned around and walked back to my desk, my hands trembling. That was the night I decided to quit. I didn't tell anyone the real reason. I just said the night shifts were too tiring. But the truth was, I couldn't stay in that building anymore. Whatever was haunting it wasn't something I could ignore or laugh off. Before we get into the next story, if you're here for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share these stories with your friends and family. Thanks.
I'm a retired New Jersey police officer. Throughout my 20 years on the force, the most disturbing call I ever received was for a school lockdown happening at a nearby middle school, of which I'll leave out the name for legal reasons. It happened on a stormy, dark day. My car number was called on the radio to respond to a lockdown where a suspicious-looking man was seen stepping out from a white van parked behind the school and walking into the back door by the boys' locker room. I pulled up to the back parking lot of the school, right next to the white van. Nobody was inside, and all the doors and trunk were locked. I opened the red back door that entered into the gym hallway, right by the locker rooms. The main lights had been turned off, so the whole inside of the school was dark. I unholstered the flashlight from my belt and used it to navigate the halls. I made it to the lobby of the school, where a woman emerged from the front office. She quietly told me to check the boys' locker room, but to be careful because the person might be armed. I called for backup on my radio and was assured backup was already on the way. I made it back to the hallway I had entered from, where I found the boys' locker room right next to the exit. I pushed it open very quietly. There were no windows in the room. Therefore, there was no light whatsoever in that locker room, only the light provided by my flashlight. There was a white noise in the room, some kind of vent on the ceiling blowing air. But even over that, I was hearing faint scratching type noises or little dings on the locker doors from the other side. I was supposed to make my presence as a police officer known, but honestly, I was just too scared. The tension in the room was insane. I held my flashlight in one hand and my gun in the other as I snuck to the other side of the locker room. It seemed like wherever I was in the room, the dings and thuds would be coming from the opposite side. I was standing in the corner of the locker room, right by the door to the bathroom, when the sound of someone slamming a locker door from another room made me jump out of my skin. I went in the direction where I heard the slam to find out that it came from the boys' football team locker room. There was no door separating the main locker room from the football locker room. The lockers in here were also 3 times the size. I finally had the nerve to make my presence known by shouting, "Police!" After shouting, a kid started screaming, "Help!" from somewhere in the room. It was very muffled though. The kid pounded on a locker door on the other side of the row I was in. When I realized the boy was trapped inside of a locker, I felt sick to my stomach. I told him I'd be right back, once again, calling for backup while running outside to where the white van had been. It was gone. My biggest mistake was not getting the plate number first thing. I told dispatch to be on the lookout for a suspicious white van. I ran back into the school and instructed the staff in the front office to end the school day and to send somebody with a key to the locker room to get the boy out. The boy had been held by the man with a knife to his back. As I speculate, the man was quietly trying to get the 12-year-old boy to his van. The boy was bleeding on his arm from the man cutting him while he resisted. The man's van was spotted a week later in a 7-Eleven parking lot where he was arrested after being properly identified.
I was staying in a Hampton in New Jersey when I was visiting Rowan University, a college I potentially wanted to attend. My family couldn't come with me, so I was on my own after attending campus tours. I went to get a bite to eat at a nearby restaurant, and then went back to the hotel at around 8 p.m. Planning on going back to campus again the next day, about an hour after returning to my room, a strange alarm started going off in my room, along with a white light flashing from the corner of the ceiling. A message started looping shortly after, as well saying something along the lines of, "All Hampton and guests, please remain in your rooms. This is a lockdown." I'd never heard of a lockdown in a hotel. I never even knew hotels had alarms like this. I found it more interesting and exciting than anything else. Eventually, the sound of the alarm stopped, but the light kept flashing, and every 20 seconds or so, the message would repeat. It was only like 9:30, so I turned on the TV just as background noise while I started changing clothes and brushing my teeth. I shut the lights when I was done and hopped under the covers. I watched TV for half an hour before shutting it off. The light was still flashing with an obnoxious, bright white. Every few seconds, it was definitely going to hinder my sleep. I was starting to consider calling the front desk to ask what was going on, when the phone rang. It was someone from the front desk. I was expecting them to tell me something about the alarm and when it would shut off, but instead, the person on the other end spoke in a very concerned voice. She told me to remain calm and walk out the door. I took that opportunity to ask her what exactly was going on. She went on to tell me that there was somebody in the room with me, and to get out immediately, I dropped the phone and instinctively started looking around everywhere. Part of me was curious to see if somebody was in fact in the room. I checked under the bed, looked into the empty bathroom, nobody in either spots. Then I noticed the closet door right next to the bathroom. It was one of those closets with a wooden sliding door. It was open just a tiny crack, and through that tiny crack I could see a person's face. At first it didn't sink in what I was seeing, but when the door slid shut, that was when I freaked out and ran out the door. The people at the front desk showed me security footage from an hour earlier of some sketchy-looking man walking around the hallways, apparently looking for a certain room. When he got to my door, he opened it with the card. He somehow acquired, and that was it. I stayed around as the authorities took the person out in chains. It was a man, of course, on the shorter side, easily 40s. He looked at me as he passed, as if he knew who I was immediately. It's scary thinking back that he may have been watching me for more than an hour from that closet.
I was 16 in my junior year of high school. I had 9 periods in a school day. 5th period was lunch, and straight from there was my astronomy class. My astronomy class was actually held in one of the 2 basement classrooms of the school. My high school was big. There were 3 floors, and even that wasn't enough to accommodate all the classes offered. So, the school built 2 classrooms in the basement. It was honestly kind of creepy down there when nobody else was around. It used to be a janitorial area. However, it was remodeled to better resemble a typical hallway. The only thing was, there were no intercoms or loudspeakers down in the basement at that time. For that reason, no classes were held down there during first period for the morning announcements. Everyone referred to this little section of the basement as the chamber, and everyone always tried to get classes down there just because it was air conditioned, and the classes were typically easier. Plus, it had its own bathroom down there. We had a quiz in astronomy that day. Usually, I was one of the first done, just because I found the class easy. After I finished my quiz, I texted my friend, who was in the other basement classroom, to meet me in the bathroom because I was bored. He told me okay. I walked out of the classroom and down the small hallway to the bathroom. A few seconds later, the door opened and my friend JJ entered the bathroom. We were joking around for a while until JJ checked his phone and said someone texted him saying the school was going on lockdown. We both looked at each other with the same grins. Neither of our teachers saw us leave the classrooms. That meant we had free range of the school while it was on lockdown. We agreed to sneak upstairs and look around the hallways just for the hell of it. The worst that would happen is that we'd explain how we couldn't hear the announcements in the basement classrooms. Upon opening the basement door to the main floor, we were surprised to find all the lights had been turned off, so the hallways were pretty much pitch black, aside from the light pouring in from the doors in the lobby. This was legit because usually the lights were left on in the hallways during lockdowns. Something was going down, and we didn't know if we were even comfortable walking around now. JJ stepped out a little further into the hallway, and I followed suit. JJ then looked down the hall and said, "Who's that?" I looked, and emerging from the darkness was a man. At first, we couldn't tell if he was a teacher or not, but as he got closer, we realized this guy wasn't dressed at all like any staff member. He was dressed like a bum. "All right, let's go," I told JJ as we hurried back down to the basement. He surely saw us, whoever he was. We saw both classrooms had their doors shut and lights off, so to avoid making a scene, we decided to hide in the bathroom. I shut the light first thing, and then we both went to hide in the corner stall. There was complete silence in the room. No ventilation, no heaters, nothing, just the sound of me and JJ breathing and an occasional drip from the sink. The door to the bathroom suddenly opened, and light from the hallway poured into the bathroom for a brief moment. The door shut, and the bathroom was once again pitch black. Me and JJ tried our best to control our breathing. The room was so silent that we could hear somebody walking over to our side of the bathroom. The person stopped and started breathing really heavily, as if they were out of breath. Me and JJ were both scared to death. JJ did something very dumb. He whispered in my ear, "We have to crawl out through the other stalls." The room was so silent, however, that even JJ's whisper could be heard from across the room. The heavy breathing outside the stall stopped, and the person tried pressing the stall door in. That was when I whispered, "Go, go," to JJ. We both crawled under the sidewall to the next stall over, and then the next stall, and then finally out to the other side of the bathroom. The person was now full on banging on the stall door. Me and JJ hopped up off the floor, opened the door, and as the light filled the room again, we saw the guy from upstairs in the corner. We pounded on the door to JJ's class. The teacher let us in within seconds. JJ explained everything as the teacher locked the door, mentioning a gun sticking out of the man's pocket. I was shocked to hear this because I didn't see a gun, but I went along with it anyway. Usually, a bunch of high school students would be laughing their asses off at two students causing a scene like this. But I noticed all the kids sitting in the corner looked concerned. A sudden bang at the door made everyone jump, and a couple of girls squealed out of fear. JJ, the teacher, and I could see the man standing at the door, looking through the window while trying the doorknob. After a few bangs on the door, out of what seemed to be anger, he turned and walked down the hallway, back to the stairs. We don't know how much longer the lockdown went on for, but for over an hour we sat in silence in the room, other than the teacher occasionally asking me and JJ questions in a very concerned tone, shaking his head after everything we would tell him. Eventually, somebody from upstairs called the teacher, and he instructed all of us to single file walk up the stairs and out of the building, where we would be greeted by cops. Me and JJ did the best we could at describing the man to the cops and to the dean. One of the cops patted me on the back, and we were sent off to go home. After this incident, the school installed cameras everywhere and ramped up the security budget. This incident never got media attention, so honestly, we never found out if police caught the guy. I'm convinced that man had no other intentions but to kill us then and there in that bathroom stall.